Friends, if you don't mind, please subscribe to my channel. I have a dream of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. Let's start the story. The voice drifted from the dining room, soft yet unmistakable. I paused in the hallway, holding my breath. It's all falling into place, Jenna said, her tone laced with a confidence I hadn't heard before. Evan is completely clueless. Soon enough, his grandfather's fortune will be ours, and Derek and I can finally live the life we deserve. My blood turned cold. Jenna's words pierced through me like a blade, each one sharper than the last. She thought I was still upstairs, getting ready for the party she had insisted we host for my parents' friends. Instead, I stood there, frozen in disbelief, listening to my wife scheme against me. We'd been married for 3 years, and I had always thought we were happy. Sure, there were moments when her ambition seemed to eclipse our relationship, but I chalked it up to her drive to succeed. Now I realized that drive had always been about something else, about taking what she thought was rightfully hers. Jenna came from a middle-class family, and though she worked as a marketing executive, she had always craved more status, more luxury, more money. It was that hunger that led her to me, the grandson of a man who owned a company worth nearly $23 million. I had never considered the inheritance a motivator for her interest in me, but as I listened, it was as if the scales fell from my eyes. She wasn't alone in this plan. Derek, the man she was talking about, was someone I had never met, but his name had come up occasionally in Jenna's life. A friend, she sometimes mentioned. Now, I understood that he was much more than that. As Jenna's voice trailed off, I felt a calm settle over me, a calm that came with clarity. There would be no arguments, no begging her to stay. She had made her choice, and so had I. I walked away from the hallway and made my way to the backyard, where my grandfather sat with a few other guests. He looked up at me with a questioning glance, sensing the change in my demeanor. "It's time we had a talk," I said quietly, "about Jenna, and about what we're going to do next." As I walked my grandfather Arthur away from the crowd, the gravity of the situation sank in. At 78, Arthur was still sharp as a tack, running his business with the same shrewdness that had built his fortune from the ground up. He had always been a skeptic, often warning me to be careful about who I trusted, especially with a fortune like his in the picture. When we were out of earshot, I told him everything I had overheard. His face remained impassive, his piercing gaze fixed on me as I recounted Jenna's betrayal and the plan she had with Derek. "I can't say I'm entirely surprised," he finally said, his voice as firm as ever. "I've had my doubts about her from the start, but now we need to handle this smartly." I nodded, feeling the anger simmer just beneath the surface. "I don't want to just end things. I want to make sure she pays for what she's done, and I want Derek to feel the consequences too. They think they're being clever, but we'll show them what clever really looks like." Arthur's lips curled into a slight smile. "Good," he said. "We'll need to be thorough and make sure she has no idea what's coming. I've seen people like Jenna before, greedy, willing to burn bridges to get what they want. We'll make sure she burns her own." With Arthur's support, I felt a surge of determination. He suggested we start by gathering proof, not just of Jenna's affair, but of her attempts to manipulate the inheritance. It wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about ensuring that Jenna and Derek's plan collapsed around them. I thought back to how Jenna and I had met, how she had effortlessly charmed her way into my life. In hindsight, there were signs that she was more interested in my lifestyle than in me, but I had always dismissed them as paranoia. Now I knew better. I was going to take advantage of her complacency, of the way she thought she had everything under control. It was time to start building the trap, and the first step was to continue acting like nothing had changed. Jenna would never see it coming. I kept my facade intact, treating Jenna with the same warmth and affection as before. It was sickening at times, knowing what she was doing behind my back, but I had to stay composed. If she sensed even a hint of suspicion, she'd bolt, and I needed her right where she was. The first order of business was evidence collection. I hired a private investigator, Carl, who specialized in cases like this. Within a week, Carl delivered a file that confirmed my worst fears. Photos, recordings, and text message logs detailed Jenna's ongoing affair with Derek, a man nearly a decade older than me who ran a luxury real estate agency. It turned out Derek wasn't just in it for love either. He was deeply in debt and saw Jenna's connection to my family's fortune as a way out. With each new piece of evidence, I felt my resolve harden. Arthur and I developed a multi-step plan that would dismantle Jenna's schemes while leaving her no room to maneuver. First, we met with the family lawyer to discreetly change the structure of my grandfather's company, moving assets into a trust that only I could access. Jenna had counted on my inheritance being liquid cash, easily divided in a divorce. Instead, it was now locked away in an intricate legal web, one that could only be accessed through legitimate means. Jenna would get nothing. Next, I started altering our financial accounts, slowly separating joint assets and transferring funds to accounts under my sole ownership. I kept these changes subtle, making sure to update her on our finances periodically so she wouldn't notice the discrepancies. Meanwhile, I had Carl investigate Derek's business dealings, looking for any vulnerabilities we could exploit. It didn't take long. Derek's real estate agency had a string of legal issues that we could use to our advantage. With the groundwork laid, it was time to put pressure on Jenna. I began dropping hints that things might not be going as smoothly as they seemed, mentioning casually that my grandfather was thinking about changing his will or restructuring the company. Her reactions were predictable: forced smiles, nervous glances, and subtle probing questions. It was clear she was worried. Then came the final piece of the setup. I orchestrated a situation where Jenna's lover would show his true colors. I arranged for an anonymous tip to be sent to Derek's wife about his affair with Jenna. I didn't do this out of some moral obligation. I wanted to see how Derek would react when his comfortable life was threatened. As expected, Derek panicked. He began pressuring Jenna to accelerate their plan, making her more reckless and desperate. Everything was in motion, and neither Jenna nor Derek knew that they were walking right into a trap. The stage was set for a confrontation that would dismantle their lives in the same way they had tried to dismantle mine. The perfect moment came 2 weeks later, during a dinner party at our house. It was a casual gathering, just some friends, family, and business associates. I knew Jenna loved these events, parading our perfect life in front of others. She was in her element, laughing with guests, savoring every moment, blissfully unaware that this evening would be the turning point. As dessert was being served, I clinked my glass and called for everyone's attention. "I'd like to take a moment to share some personal news," I began, keeping my voice steady. "Jenna and I have decided to part ways. We're getting a divorce." The room fell silent, and Jenna's face turned pale. Her shock was genuine. She hadn't seen this coming. "Evan, what are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. I pulled out the folder Carl had put together and placed it on the table. "This is what I'm talking about," I said, my tone calm and deliberate. "For the past year, you've been living a double life with Derek. I know everything: the meetings, the lies, the plan to get your hands on my grandfather's inheritance." Jenna's expression shifted from shock to a mixture of anger and fear. "This is ridiculous," she protested, her voice rising. "You're making wild accusations without any proof." "Oh, there's plenty of proof," I replied, pulling out some of the printed messages and photographs, scattering them across the table for everyone to see. "And if anyone wants more, I've got videos too. It's all right here." Murmurs and whispers filled the room. Jenna's facade was crumbling fast. "This isn't what it looks like," she cried, desperate to regain control. "Evan, please, let's talk about this privately." "No, Jenna," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "There's nothing to talk about. I've already filed for divorce. You'll get nothing because, contrary to what you've been counting on, the inheritance is legally untouchable to you. My grandfather changed the will months ago." Jenna's eyes widened, but before she could respond, I continued. "And Derek, if you're listening, you might want to check your mail. Your wife knows everything. By the way, I made sure your little real estate empire's dirty secrets came to light too. Consider it my parting gift." The room buzzed with tension, the guests exchanging stunned glances. Jenna looked around frantically, but there was no sympathy to be found. Even her closest friends seemed horrified by the revelations. Derek was conspicuously absent, a fact that didn't escape anyone's notice. Jenna, now visibly shaking, tried to make a final stand. "You don't understand. This was all a mistake, Evan. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I cut her off. "You wanted to play the game and you lost. You underestimated me and overestimated your ability to deceive. It's over." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving Jenna to face the fallout. I didn't bother looking back. There was no satisfaction to be found in her misery, only a deep sense of relief that I had taken back control of my life. The lies were laid bare and justice had been served. As I exited into the night, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing that the damage they had tried to inflict on me had been turned back on them. Jenna and Derek would now have to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, just as they had planned to do with mine. The difference was they had built their house of cards on deception, and it had all come crashing down. After the party, Jenna's life fell apart rapidly. She moved out the next day, but not before trying one last time to appeal to my sense of forgiveness. I listened to her desperate pleas, but I felt nothing. Her apology was as hollow as the promises she'd made throughout our marriage. Without the safety net she thought she had, she was left to fend for herself, with no access to my grandfather's money and her reputation in tatters. The divorce proceedings were swift and ruthless. Thanks to the evidence I had collected, she wasn't entitled to anything beyond what the law strictly mandated. There would be no cushy settlement, no luxury lifestyle supported by alimony. The house, the cars, the vacation home, all of it stayed with me. Her attempts to fight back only brought more of her dirty laundry into the open, further ruining her credibility. Derek wasn't faring much better. His wife not only left him but also filed for divorce, citing adultery and fraud. She took half of his assets, leaving him to face the financial ruin that came with his failing business. My tip-off about his shady real estate practices led to a series of lawsuits, and within a few months, his company went under. The glamorous life he had tried to secure with Jenna disappeared as quickly as it had been built. With Jenna and Derek's downfall complete, I took some time to reflect on the whole ordeal. I wasn't left feeling triumphant or vindicated, just relieved. There had been moments when I had wondered if it was worth the effort to orchestrate such a detailed revenge. But then I would remember the way Jenna had spoken about me that night, as if I were nothing more than a stepping stone. It was clear that neither she nor Derek deserved any sympathy. My grandfather and I had a final conversation about everything that had transpired. "You handled yourself well," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's not easy to deal with betrayal like that, but you didn't let it break you." "I learned from the best," I replied, managing a small smile. Arthur's approval meant a lot to me. It was his guidance that had kept me grounded throughout the entire process. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, this time on my own terms. I took a break from the corporate world, using my skills to start a consulting firm that worked with small, ethical businesses. It was a fresh start that allowed me to distance myself from the toxic memories of the past. As for relationships, I wasn't in any rush. Trust was something I'd have to rebuild slowly, and I was content taking my time. The whole experience had taught me to value honesty above all else, and I knew that eventually I would find someone who shared the same principles. The past was behind me, and the future looked promising. Untainted by Jenna's schemes or Derek's deceit, I was free, in every sense of the word, and that freedom was the greatest revenge of all. Months passed, and Jenna faded into a distant memory. She attempted a few public displays to salvage her reputation, posting about self-growth and moving forward on social media, but the damage was already done. Her friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with her scandal. She eventually left the city, taking a marketing job far below the glamorous lifestyle she once chased. Derek, meanwhile, disappeared from the social circles entirely. His fall from grace was swift, and without the wealth and connections he had relied on, he found himself struggling to stay afloat. His failed attempts at restarting his career served as a reminder of how quickly everything can crumble when built on lies. As for me, I stayed focused on my new consulting business, which grew rapidly. Helping small businesses thrive was not only financially rewarding, but also a way to reconnect with what mattered: honest work and genuine relationships. I started volunteering, giving back to the community in ways that I hadn't before. One evening, sitting in my quiet living room, I thought about how different my life had become. I had traded the illusion of perfection for authenticity, and in doing so, had finally found peace. The past had tried to take me down, but I had emerged stronger, ready for whatever came next. Thank you, friends.